And so I also remember as a math teacher being trained in how to teach ELA. It was like every teacher is an ELA teacher. I think every teacher needs to be a career teacher.
Welcome to Innovating Education. I'm Dr. Riley Williams, and in each episode, we explore bold ideas and breakthrough strategies shaping the future of teaching and learning. Today's guest is Shira Woolf Cohen, educator, author, and co-founder of Innovageous. With over 25 years of experience bridging youth workforce development and K-12 education, Shira has dedicated her career to making learning relevant and empowering. She's here to talk about her forthcoming book, Leading Future-Focused Schools, Engaging and Preparing Students for Career Success, which launches this July. This conversation is a must for any school leader looking to ignite a culture shift towards deeper engagement and real-world readiness. Shira, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Riley. I'm so excited to be here and to share more about the book and talk to you today.
Well, let's start with your story. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what inspired Leading Future-Focused Schools?
Yeah, so leading future focused schools was inspired by my own experience as a young person, but also raising a 15-year-old daughter who is very creative and spirited in her own way. And so, as a young person in high school, I slept through classes. I barely scraped by with C's. It was actually really interesting. What drove me to be an educator was actually, really a negative interaction with a math teacher who told me I shouldn't be in his college level course. And so while I was in school and really disengaged, I also was really active in after school programs. I was in school plays, not school plays, the community plays. I was in an after school clubs, right? None of which were connected to my school, right? Either through a synagogue or through a community group. And in that space, I actually was kind of a different person. I was spirited, I was excited, I was a leader. And the whole time, I really thought to myself, like, how am I really these two different people? And so, as I was starting to craft my career, and I knew I wanted to be in education, and I decided I was going to be a math teacher at the moment, a college level tracked math teacher said to me, "This is not your experience, go to a different class." And I started to think about what would actually mean if I felt the way that I did in school, right? What if I felt that my voice was heard? What if I was part of a larger community? What if I could connect what I was learning to things I was doing every day? And that was something I knew I had to do. And so I got a lot of experience working in after school clubs and being a summer camp counselor and really building up my skills in a place that allowed me to be relationship oriented and community oriented with young people, all the while knowing I had to bring this into my classroom. And so when I was ready, I went and started being a middle school math teacher. And in that space, I was scared out of my mind. I cried in the closet the first few days. Students ran all over me. I had to go between you know, am I strict? Am I not strict? And in that, I really formed relationships with young people that actually had nothing to do with the content. It had to do with who they were as people and what their leadership style was and what they could contribute and what was their strengths. And then I started really bringing in my content. And I started saying, okay, I see a strength in you in this thing. You are a great storyteller. Do you know that we need to use data and statistics to tell stories? And I would start to tap into the young people in connecting to my content. And that really started to inspire this work because what I ended up seeing was I ended up seeing young people who were like stepping out of their comfort zone, middle school students who other teachers were having consistent behavior problems were actually like coming to me during lunch and asking to help with things. I started taking young people to the National Service Learning Conference, students who had never been on planes or to hotels and things like that. And I realized that this actually wasn't just about my classroom, because imagine if this was school-wide, right, where students felt relevance and felt connected. And so that experience from my own young adolescence through high school, and then figuring out who I wanted to be as an educator is really my why. And the second part of my why is my own daughter, because my own daughter has been crafty from a very young age. She has also been, frankly, not challenged in school on a very authentic way. And so we were always fostering her creativity. She was the kid in fifth grade during COVID where underneath the screen, she was watching YouTube of how to learn how to crochet. And from that, she started a business and she started going to farmers markets and craft fairs and selling, right? And I wanted other people to know that experience and what we did, but I also wanted her school to know about it. So yesterday, I got pre-order books and I made sure she dropped it off to her because it was actually the most important person to me to get this book is my own child's principal. And so that's what led to this book. It also is a book I've been looking for my entire career. How, as a leader, do I integrate career preparedness, engagement, my leadership systems, my own leadership values, what my school, values into a larger system. And so those things really brought me to the point of needing to write it because I couldn't find it anywhere out there.
So, in the opening chapters, you emphasize that the future is now. Why is this such an urgent moment for schools to reimagine how we engage students and prepare them for life beyond the classroom?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear that engagement and relevance in our traditional school systems are struggling. We look at attendance rates and they're not necessarily strong, right? We look at graduation rates, they are all over the place, all over the country, right? We look at forget graduation rates, let's talk about, rates of going into post-secondary experiences and even more than that, persistency through those post-secondary experiences so they can be successful. There is not a strong track record across the United States for this. When you ask young people, they don't see relevance in what they're learning on a day-to-day basis, right? I hear from my own kids, I hear from schools I'm in, I see it in the news, I see research about it, right? Gallup has done some great research about, our connections to relevance and things like that. And I think what we're not doing is we're not making connections and we're not making things engaging and relevant for our young people. When you look down the road, the economic mobility of from generation to generation is not getting stronger. And that's concerning, right? I want my own kid to make more money and be more successful and be more like have more mobility than I had. That's not necessarily the case in what's happening. I know every parent wants that, but that's not happening, right? And the research says that. And then there's this new definition for what success looks like after high school. We went through a space where we were hyper focused on college, right? Every kid goes to college. That is not the case. Every young person needs to have a plan, they need to have a pathway, they need to have a post secondary experience, work, learning, further development, but it doesn't have to be a 4 year university. And so the more pathways there are, the more opportunities there are for our schools to reimagine what's possible directly after graduation, 2 years after graduation, 4 years after graduation for their young people. And so the time is now because we have a changing society. We have new regulations about what states are going to be responsible for and what connections they have to their workforce investment boards and the trends in their communities. So now's the time for us to think about not how do we change our schools, but how do we take them to the next level? And how do we make sure that our schools are engaging and making sure content is relevant for now and for the future?
Wow. I mean, I completely agree with what you just said. It's interesting because in my own personal life, I've always encouraged Becca. I'm like, Becca, 18, she'll probably be 16 or 17 when she graduates. I said, that's too young in your brain to be making these lifelong decisions. Why don't you take a break? I actually encourage her to join the military just to kind of get some real world experience as well. But, you know, take time to really understand you, to understand what you want before you do all the investment in time and energy, maybe something that you're not going to like 5 years down the road. So,
Mhm. Ooh,
I mean, this is a conversation we do need to have right now.
yes. And I love what you just said, how you're having these conversations with your own kids, right? Around find out who you are, find out what you're good at, find your passions. Because what I don't hear you saying is, who do you want to be when you grow up? Right? Because that's not a question that we necessarily need to ask kids in elementary school or even middle school. But what we do need to do is we do need them to understand themselves, right? What are their passions? What are their strengths? What are areas they need to work on? How they work with other people, right? So that they can make really good decisions when it comes to understanding what is available out there and what they could be. And honestly, you and I don't actually know what they could be or what's going to be out there because that's not going to be the same in 10 years from now.
Exactly. So you introduced the idea of future focused mindset. How is that different from traditional career readiness, and how can leaders start to cultivate it school wide?
Yeah, that's a really great question. When I think about career readiness, I think about curriculum we're doing with young people. I think about specific activities. I think about not necessarily the things that are happening day to day in their math classroom or in the hallways or the way they interact with their counselor. And so when we think about a future focused mindset, it's about cultivating a mindset across the school that lets us see small embedded actions or interactions that demonstrate that future focused mindset. And so some of the things, we specifically think about, especially when we're in classrooms, I think that's one of the most traditional places where there might be barriers for educators thinking like, I'm teaching here math, right? Or I'm responsible for social studies, or I'm responsible for teaching fifth grade, right? But this is the space where we oftentimes want to look for those regular interactions. And so here are some of the things that we might see on a day-to-day basis that really demonstrate that future focused mindset. So we might see young people having roles in the classroom. I know we see that a lot, right? Students have jobs. Students also, and in real life, we don't just get handed jobs. We have to somehow acknowledge why we're good at the job. We might have to do an interview, right? But we're seeing young people engaging in jobs and engaging in a responsible way and gaining access to those jobs in a way that isn't just saying, hey, I want to be the paper passer outer, but like, I'd like to be the paper passer outer because I'm very organized, my folders are clean, and I would be great to keep track of this, right? Like something, it doesn't have to be an application. It could be if it was middle or high school, right? But maybe it's something simple. We also see a lot of intentional visuals that the teacher has put up around the room. Everything from student work that demonstrates professional behaviors to connections to specific careers for maybe students served as student reporters, and you might see a bulletin board that has the reporters pictures and their bios or something, right? But we're seeing visuals in the classroom that don't just say, hey, my kids are writing and my students are writing, but they're writing for a purpose. We also see social emotional skills integrated, but I just want to say more than integrated, they're named, right? When a student demonstrates, I saw you work through and persevere through that concern that you had or through that problem that you weren't able to overcome, we're able to name that so that students then can say, oh, I did persevere that time. That wasn't that hard. Maybe next time I can do it again, right? And so we're naming specifically those skills. We're also integrating cross-sector competencies. Some people say soft skills, some people say durable skills, some people say 21st century. We always say cross-sector skills. This is the skills that doesn't matter day to day, classroom to classroom, that every teacher can foster, right? Around time management, around communication. Very similar to SEL, but we're specifically fostering them so that our young people know that this is important. We're also acknowledging how that content can be used, right? I saw a teacher in action who kept calling her students architects when they were learning in their science class. And I was like, I love this, right? But how do we specifically make connections? And something as simple as that, referring to the students as a career name, or just acknowledging that, this is something that this career does every day. We're not forcing careers on young people. We're just making them know, again, I might be really good with numbers and maybe you might call me an analyst that day, right? And so I think there's a lot of things in that way and how we connect the content. Some of the other things might even include like making sure that students have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership, even in a simple way, getting up to show the problem, being partnered with someone else, but really bringing out those leaderships and their independent strengths on a daily basis. None of these require planning. And I think that's the key for teachers is the future focused mindset doesn't necessarily mean I have to set aside time to do a lesson. It just means that I'm looking through this lens when I'm planning and when I'm interacting with young people to make it relevant and engaging for them.
One of the book's powerful assertions is that every teacher is a career teacher. What does that mean in practice, and how can leaders support that mindset shift?
Yeah, so it's hard. Teachers, right? I was a middle school math teacher. I received lots of training in how to teach math and lots of training and maybe how to do traditional classroom management. No one ever sat me down and said, let's talk about how you foster social emotional skills, or how do you bring out strengths of your young people, or how do I connect to careers? Careers, I'm here being a teacher. I certainly don't know all the careers that are out there, right? And so I also remember as a math teacher being trained in how to teach ELA. It was like every teacher is an ELA teacher. I think every teacher needs to be a career teacher. We are all responsible for the future of our society, for the future of our young people. And so many times schools are focusing in on a counselor who comes around once a month and does a career lesson, right? Or the platform. Some of these platforms are great, but the facilitation and the implementation might feel very compliancy. And so having every teacher as a career teacher means that we're building that future focused mindset that I just talked about. It means that every teacher has a shared responsibility in knowing that, like, what I'm teaching in this class, I should be connecting to the future because this student in front of me might actually really connect to this and want to learn more. And unfortunately for us as teachers, sometimes people feel like we have to have all the answers. We don't have to have all the answers, but we have to be able and willing to reach out to others. And so I do think as a leader, it is going to be really important for leaders to focus on how do I support and hold accountability to my educators when we've set this vision for a future focused mindset, right? High support and high accountability. What that means is that we're really clear in our communication, we're providing professional development and resources, we're building a shared buy-in, right? But then on the other end, we're also checking in, right? We're going in and doing walkthroughs. We're giving feedback. We're giving opportunities to say, like, here's something that you might add in and be a value added instead of saying, like, hey, I noticed you didn't do this, right? Because we're coming from a strengths based approach in building this career development and future focused mindset across the school.
I really appreciate what you said. When I was in school, absolutely everything was college driven, right? And if you were on that AP track, it
Yeah.
was you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or you're not going to be successful at all.
Yeah.
How many students actually feel that way?
I honestly, it's funny because I think that students only feel this way when the adults around them have put these feelings in their head. I think when we demonstrate to young people that there are multiple pathways and we give them those opportunities to explore them, then they feel confident about their pathways. I think here's something I see a lot. I see schools who are very college focused, high schools, and then, they start putting up all these graduation posts and of who's going where. And I'm like, oh, okay, right? Like, I'm not sure that maybe college was the answer for some of those kids, but because we're very college focused and that is the culture. And so I also think we have to be culturally responsive to the community we're in, right? And if the college focus is key, then us really honing in on what are the different opportunities, the types of colleges. I recently learned about their, whole network of colleges that really are like co-op, have a co-op feature that allows for students to lean in. And so I think it's going to be really key to not just have students that don't go to traditional four-year universities to just land where they land for the sake of going to college. And so I think it's going to be up to us as adults to create that. I always say every kid should be ready to prepare, ready to apply to college to make that choice. It doesn't mean they have to, right? But yes, every student should be college prepared, but it doesn't mean that they have to do that. There's a lot of pathways for our young people that lead them to roles that are not don't require degrees, but I mean, I got graduates who are making more than, I made as a principal in their first 5 years in trades. And so that's really great. And so again, we also don't know what's out there. I think 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought that the virtual remote role, right, was going to be such a prominent role in our society of working from home. 10 years later, right? It is you and I are sitting here across the country having this conversation. I have career partners who Zoom in. I work with clients in other, states who I never meet in person. And that's just a different world. And so I think the more we can also open up our eyes to like what's possible and what we don't know is possible, the more our young people will feel confident in not just choosing a 4 year or 2 year pathway, but finding a pathway that works for them, that they are prepared for, they've made informed choices on, and that they're going to be successful and persevere through any barriers that come up. Because it breaks my heart when I see young people who can't persevere through, their college experiences or post secondary or even work experiences. So that's our role.
And you've structured the book into three parts, right? Ignite the future, innovate learning, and leading with courage. Can you walk us through how those pieces fit together?
Yeah. I think, okay. So in my head when I was writing the book, I really was first thinking about like to make this work, what needs to happen? And the first thing that needs to happen is we have to tap into passions. We have to tap into the heart and soul of the whole school community, not just for our students, right? But for the whole community, for our teachers, for our larger community, for our families. And so the first step to this work is really igniting the future, right? And igniting what's possible and having people start to buy in and be open to this idea that our schools are places that not just help people learn math and English and social studies and arts, but also help them think about what they're good at and what they value and what their passions are and what's possible. And so we have to first ignite that and get that interest going, get people like biting a little bit so that they can then be ready to think about how we innovate the learning experience, right? Which is that second part. In the second part of the book, we definitely get more into specifics of how do we do this, right? Everything from how do we build ownership and voice with our young people? How do we align career activities to our contents? How do we leverage the ecosystem partnerships, right? How do we really innovate the learning experiences for our students and the operations that surround those experiences to support our teachers and our community members? And that happens in that innovate learning section. In the third part of the book, we are really focused on the leader, right? And so this whole book is written for leaders. However, the resources that are in here are meant to turn over to your educators. They are meant to be shared, they are meant for you to inspire. And so the leading with courage in last part is really about the steps that we need to take as the leader to do this, right? Because we have to lead with courage. Because if we don't, then we will stop doing this work. It will get hard. It might seem that there might be certain barriers. Maybe we run into things, it could be anything from health to community issues, right? But we have to be able to lead with courage to know that sometimes the solutions for some of the issues or barriers that come up are going back to how are we igniting the future and how are we innovating learning, right? And so I learned that early on in my career. I learned that by engaging young people in service learning, having tough things happen in a community and saying like, actually, we can't fix this as adults. Young people need to fix this. And so the leading with courage is about how do we do this? How do we do this with our teachers, our students? How do we make sure that we continue to tap into ourselves? How do we make sure that we have a plan and we have systems to do this? And that's how all three of the parts work together. I should also say that in the three parts, there are weaved in some really interesting features. One being that it was really interesting. I wrote the book And after I was done, I was like, there are these topics that I want to integrate that I didn't write about when I was initially writing, but I recognized were important. Those things were around culture responsive and relevant career readiness. It was about communication, about values, about how we include students with IEPs and students who have, diverse needs into these programs. And so I actually reached out and had my team members write advice sections. And so you will see 4 advice sections. There are also reflection activities, planning activities, a digital one-stop shop that you'll be able to access with lots of reproducibles and other materials that you can use in your school community. And so those things are actually weaved throughout each part so that each part has continuity and ongoing reflection as well as like action that's happening as you're reading the book.
That's exciting. A lot to unpack for sure. You've worked really hard on it. Um, so, what role does community partnerships play with your work? Can you share an example of how ecosystem partnerships can be integrated meaningfully into a school's career development continuum?
Yeah. So we definitely can't do this alone, right? I always say we are better together. And I think that if as a educational system, I say education system, not school system, purposefully as an education system of workforce development, of out of school time programs, of youth development programs, of schools, we decided to work together towards the same causes and had specific intentional goals that we were all working towards that we likely would be more impactful and successful. But a lot of us and a lot of our systems are working in silos. And so what we mean by this is that we can't do this alone. We can't have teachers integrating career activities or a future focused mindset in their classroom if they don't have access to a database or an ecosystem of partners that might share their information, right? We can't have our local politicians be making decisions without hearing from our young people, right? And so there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just about saying, like, yeah, we have a career shadow day and our students go out and they spend a day with a career partner. It's about really being intentional with them to create a partnership that is both mutually beneficial and is sustainable because one of the worst things that can happen is you have a partnership and you work really hard on it and like the next year it's gone. And so if we make sure it's mutually beneficial, we can also make sure that we are having this partnership that really is authentic. And so I think about some of the different roles that ecosystem partners can have. And I think about out of school time programs, higher eds, local politicians, families, local community members, corporate community, nonprofits, right? All of these folks, we can have them coming in to do simple guest speaking. We can also have them, by the way, Zoom has changed a lot about that. And so it used to be like a big deal to send folks, right, have to take the half day to go to the career day. Now it's like, I can Zoom in for 20 minutes. That's no big deal. But when we get deeper, what it looks like is community partners and career professionals actually meeting with teachers so that they can learn what teachers are teaching and they might be able to give some real world examples, right? Or input. As we get into the older grades in high schools and some of the career level classes, we've even seen uh, companies partner for the specific reason of we want to make sure there's a pathway for your young people into our business, right? And so that means co-planning curriculum. It might mean serving on an advisory board. It might mean actually coming in and spending time with students as a guest instructor because they might know that they're going to have 5 scholarships available to then come work at their company or to pay for an assessment that's coming, right? And so we've gone from one simple, thing of, hey, I can be a guest speaker at a career day, all the way to spending time with high school students more on a regular basis for the purpose of cultivating the next generation folks. When we talk about mutually beneficial, again, that's an example of that's mutually beneficial. The teacher is gaining industry profession insight into what they can be teaching and including and using to prepare their young people through their content. But the employer is also receiving access to the next phase of their possible employees. That's what it looks like in more of the high school. But there's opportunities for young people to give back. I think about, we used to have a partnership with CHOP here in Philadelphia, Children's Hospital, where students were not just taking like intro to nursing classes and being exposed and able to go on like medical type visits, but students were also making, um, they were making kits for the students who were learning at the sites, right? And so they were actually creating books and games and working with the child life specialists. They had discussions with them, and then they were doing some fundraising and creating to then also contribute, right? So it wasn't just CHOP hosting students, they were also coming and really receiving some great resources that their students and their patients needed. And so that can happen through service learning. And so I think there are lots of ways that our employers can be a part of what's going on. It can feel one day, it can be 5 days, it can be a whole year. But I think the key is involving in all aspects and all phases of the continuum so that it doesn't feel like a one and done.
Two thoughts came to mind with that because wow. The first one was whenever you said it wasn't necessarily academics, the math, science, reading that you were interested in school, it was the extracurriculars.
Hmm.
I felt the same way in the sense like what motivated me to go to school was going to debate, going to tennis, and that was about it.
Hmm.
So I know a lot of schools, you mentioned intro to nursing, have you graduate high school, you can have an associate's degree in nursing by the time you graduate as well,
Hmm.
which is a wonderful, wonderful program. The same can be done for electricians and HVAC plumbing. Um, what are some other things that we could kind of start integrating into our career academies?
Yeah. So really interesting. I think about what we add in, first of all, should be focused on our career development continuum. And I don't necessarily think that we intentionally talked about that, but this idea that if we're waiting until career academies to start the work, it's actually too late. By the time we get to career academies, young people should be in a phase of really like thinking about preparation for a future career because they've made a decision to be in a career academy, right? And so I think about what we can do before the career academies, right? What we can do to start by building that awareness and then getting them to know what's possible, right? And so some of the things we could do that don't have to be after school clubs, but could be as part of a school, we could do student run enterprises, right? What are students doing to start the school store, to start a small cafe, right? I always say to middle school students, your principal gave you $10,000. You are going to start a business to benefit the school. What's your plan, right? And they always look at me like, did they really give me $10,000? And I'm like, yes, go for it. So I think we can start by having young people think about what kind of business they would start. Every young person wants to be an entrepreneur. They want to be an influencer. We can start media clubs. We can start fostering those cross sector competencies through electives, right? We work with a middle school here in Philadelphia that started career related electives. So every teacher has an elective that is not related to their content, right? It was like, hey, I really love to bake, right? I'm the English teacher. I love to bake. And okay, great. Baking includes measurement. It includes, right, having to write out recipes. It includes having to work together. So thinking about what were some of their hobbies and interests, and then creating these once a month career electives that happen throughout the year. They're mixed grade, and the kids really look forward to it. They know that for 10 months, they're going to be doing baking once a month, right? Other things that we can do, we can have youth opportunities, student council, but not just student council. Maybe you have a principal's council. Maybe you have a council for creating social activities, right? It's not about giving necessarily young people the job. It's
Mhm.
about giving them opportunities for them to decide, I liked this and I was good at this. Maybe I liked this, I wasn't good, but I'm going to get better at it because I really liked it, right? And making decisions so that they can continue to build their toolbox for themselves for life, because those are the things that are going to help them succeed in high school and college. Yes, they need to write, they need to be able to do math, right? They have to be able to think and know some, pieces of history. You and I were just talking about that before the show, right? But they also they need to know how to do these other things more. And so the more we can give them those opportunities to do that while also letting them know what is out there to the extent that we're able to, because we don't know what's out there all the time and we don't know what's there for the future. And so again, I don't think it's about the internships or the specific things that we might be doing when we get to those high school grades. We have to prepare them when they're younger to make those informed choices, so we don't end up with students in a whole career pathway to be a medical assistant, and then their senior year they're like, I have no desire to do any of this, right? Like, I actually want to go be an artist. And so that's going to be really important to take them through those steps so that they feel really confident. Now, I just want to name that that's in an ideal world, right? Like, I worked in a K-12 school. We could say in kindergarten, this is what was happening. In third grade, this is what's happening. In fifth, that doesn't happen. And so we also have to keep in mind that when our students maybe come to our high school, we have to, in ninth grade, do some of that self-awareness exposure work for them so that they can make informed decisions if we have career pathways. We can't just put them in ninth grade and assume that they have had that in their middle school.
I was on a plane once and, I talked to everybody. And it just so happened that I got seated next to a career educator, and she was on a trip with a bunch of students, and we got to talking, and she really opened up my eyes to the successes of a career readiness teacher. And she said that no matter what, in career readiness, you win because you can either find opportunities that the kids really enjoy, or you can find opportunities and let that child experience that they do not like their career choices. And so then, it's a win because you can move on and you can go to something else and something else and something else until you find what interests the child or the student.
Yeah, it's so true. I say I have two phrases that I often say. One is it's always a yes till it's a no, meaning like don't take no for an answer unless they actually say no, right? But I also think every experience is a learning experience, even if you learned you don't like it, right? And that's okay. We have to experience, not everything we experience in life is going to be something that really like connects to us in a positive way. You may go and your class might be taking a trip, and as part of that, you might go to the dentist's office where you have a terrible reaction to the fact that you're seeing blood and teeth and realize like, oh, that is not something I want to do. And that's okay. That's a learning experience. You can cross that off your list of things that you want to explore, right? And so I would agree with that. There is no experience that's not a learning experience when we as teachers and as educators actually take time to reflect with students. They'll start to learn that when they have time to realize that just because they didn't like it doesn't mean it wasn't valuable. And so sometimes we might even have to pause when we notice that a young person is having that type of reaction to what we're doing, to have that reflection with them so that they can process it and learn from it and take that into account for the next time they're going to do something or making a choice about their future.
In an ideal world, if I were czar, I would give credit for kids that are working during high school and middle school and make sure that because skills really are important, whether you're a cashier at Taco Casa or you're working in a department store, you're having to learn how to interact with other people, how to work with a manager, how to be on time. And that is a valuable learning experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't it the most valuable learning experience, right? I feel like it's one of the most that we have is to make sure that those things are happening and students are learning along the way those things that they can then use to tap into learning more information later, right? Like we can teach them math and we can teach them social studies and science, but when we teach them these cross sector skills, these things that they use in their life, then they can then use that to go learn more content that interests them, right? And so I think it's really interesting when teachers say, like, I teach math. Well, we teach students, right? One of the things that we're responsible for them learning is math, but we're also responsible for them becoming good people. And we're responsible for them learning how to work together and how to have time management, right? Because when we do those things, then we are educating whole people into the future that we want to see. not necessarily the future that just can learn what the teacher is teaching them in front of them, but the, the young person that can learn when they struggle. Here's what I can access as resources, right? When I have a conflict with someone, here's how I can address it, right? When I don't know how to prioritize and I have too many things going on, I can use these strategies for prioritizing my time. Those are the things that are going to make our young people succeed.
And that's what school's all about.
Hmm.
So, can you share a story that illustrates what a truly future focused shift looks like in action?
Yeah. So we work with a school here in Philadelphia, a middle school, a district middle school that recognized that their young people were making uninformed choices for high school. Because here in Philadelphia, high school choice is like college choice. This is no joke. You have a over 100 different opportunities, charter schools, district schools, private schools. There are different ways to work with your, district schools and get in, right? You have a certain process for that. There's a certain process for the charter schools. You have to figure out, do your scores meet the criteria? What is the mission of the school? Do I want to go there? We have lots of specialty schools, right? And so in this school in particular, they were thinking about, we want our students to all make really informed decisions about high school because of this high school choice process. And so they recognized that in order to do that, they had to work backwards to fifth through eighth grade and figure out what kind of opportunities they were going to give young people so that they could know what the options are that are out there and that they can feel confident in their decision. And so that led to their school kind of transforming through the future focused mindset and doing a few things. Number one, leaders started intentionally looking at classrooms through a future focused mindset lens. They were going into classrooms, they were collecting data. At first, they were a little like, I don't know if we're going to see anything. And I was like, we're going to see stuff, trust me. And so we would go in, we would do walkthroughs, we collect data on the future focused mindset action, some of which I talked about. And then we would also look at it in comparison to engagement and students on task in the classroom. And the more actions that they saw, the more students were engaged and on task in the classroom. Surprise, right? And so through that, the leaders first started by exposing teachers to what these actions were that they were looking for, started giving them resources and training and development on it, and then followed up and said, like, some of these are easy. These are things we're going to expect. We're going to expect there to be visuals in your classroom. We're going to expect that when young people come in, we use professional and academic language with them. We are going to expect that students have jobs and those jobs are valued in your classroom, right? And so the leaders started by supporting teachers and making sure they had the resources and the development and to do those actions, which again are easy. They're not about setting aside time. They're integrated actions. And then the leaders started thinking about the intentional career development continuum. What is happening at each grade? Yes, in every classroom, we have these actions going on and teachers are embodying this mindset. But then what's happening at each grade? And so that looked like things like a course for, I will say, a pilot course. We'll get to the real course, a pilot course. Then it looked like, which was only a quarter for every grade, right? And during that quarter, students learned about high school choices. They learned about the career clusters, right? Things like that. It looked like electives, right? We talked about the teacher-led electives a few minutes ago, so they had those. It looked like intentional after-school programs through partnerships through organizations like Junior Achievement, right? They help run financial literacy and a pop-up shop program or entrepreneurship program. It looked like specific youth leadership roles in the school where students served as everything from tour guides to digital media team members, right? They got in charge, I use lightly, with their Instagram page, things like that. And now what it looks like is next year, for the first time, this school has an approved course through the school district of Philadelphia for an entire year of every grade all year, just like any other course. And during that year long, they're getting a quarter of financial literacy, a quarter of career development, a quarter of middle school and high school skills and experience. And then another quarter on cross-sector skills. How are we specifically fostering those skills? And that's happening every day. And they're creating a space, a dedicated career space, career lab space that will feel a little bit differently than a traditional classroom. It's a place where young people can explore, where they can collaborate, where they can make things, where they can tinker, where they can make mistakes without judgment, right? And so that's what it looks like, right, in a school. And it's evolving. By no means is this formalized or to the fullest extent, but they've done a lot of work over the past few years. And this year, I think they said 94% of their young people got into high schools of their choice based on informed decisions.
Wow. So, for schools that are just getting started, what's one small but high impact action that a principal could take in the next 30 days?
Yep. So I would suggest that school leaders starts by it's summer. So maybe, there's two things I would think, but this is the first one because it's summer. And so I think we're focused more on planning during the summer, which would be to look at the career development continuum. You actually don't need to have the book to get access to our career development continuum. There is a resource hub on our website. Get a hold of the career development continuum, which just shares a little bit more about each phase of the career development continuum and what are some sample activities. Do a mini audit of your school and see what types of activities you already have and where they fall in that continuum. Because ideally, you're going to want to have things that span the continuum, especially if you're in high school, right? In elementary, you might focus on the first two phases of the continuum. And then you might start to think about what's possible, right? Like maybe you say, like, actually, here, I didn't realize that we do this thing already. This could be part of our continuum. So I would say that's the first thing is get out the career development continuum, look at what those phases are, and start to think about what your school currently does and what's possible. The second thing I would say is if you're listening to this and it's during the school year, think about those future focused mindset actions that I talked about and go look for them in your classroom. Go look for them in your classroom alongside engagement and on task data, because I know that you will find a correlation there. And you also will find places and specific feedback to give pushes for teachers on embodying those skills and mindsets. And so those are two things I would suggest. The book has a ton of resources, like I said, in a digital hub. So that walkthrough checklist that I just described for a school leader is actually in the hub of resources. And so when you get the book, you can access it. But those are two things to start, because this isn't about running the marathon by sprinting at the beginning, right? When you run a marathon, you get to your pace and you know your school best, you know your population, you know what's possible, you know your teacher community, you know your students. And so take the first steps based off of what you know. And the book has a lot of great resources and planning tools to help you take you through that.
That's a fantastic metaphor. Okay. What is one key takeaway that you hope educators walk away from today's conversation?
That leading a future focused school is not just about creating a set of activities that prepare and make students ready for careers. It is about the combination of identifying some core activities and then really building that mindset across the school. And so if you are a leader listening to this, I want to encourage you to think about what are some of the ways you could build that mindset across your school. And if you're a teacher, it might just be, how do I do this in my own classroom? And what kind of impacts am I seeing from engagement from students who maybe weren't always engaged before, when I start to do these things around naming SEL skills and giving them youth leadership opportunities and having them have opportunities for jobs, right? How do I see them change? What is the impact?
I have one last question. For our listeners who want to learn more about your work or access the book's resources and tools, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Sure. Well, you can always go to our website. It is innovageous.com. There's a place where you can set up a meeting. You can contact us. You can always drop me an email at shira@innovageous.com. Also, there is a site page for our book. And so you can go to innovageous.com/books and it will give you different ways to order. We want to make sure that districts and schools who are ordering multiple copies are getting discounts and all that great stuff. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to collaborate and share more about the book, and just hope that folks will go and order the paper books ready July 1st.
And for our listeners, I will be linking all of those, the website and the book, to the show notes. Shira, thank you so much for sharing your vision and practical strategies with us today. And to our listeners, thank you for continuing to reimagine what's possible. We are proud to be supported by the Solvia Learning Group, whose commitment to advancing education makes conversations like this possible. If today's episode sparked ideas or helped reframe your thinking, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your colleagues. And before we go, if you're a school or district leader looking to strengthen your crisis readiness, please check out my new professional development course for administrators, a peer-led journey to building a continuity of operations plan, now available through Circles at getcircles.org. It's practical, collaborative, and designed to help you plan for disruption while sustaining student success. Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference.